Now, I know you're probably going to be groaning at me for what I'm about to say next, but Mick Schumacher does deserve another chance in Formula 1, and I know you're tired of saying it, but I'm going to keep on saying it. But you gotta admit, if only Ferrari had stuck him at Alfa Romeo in 2021, we wouldn't be talking about this right now. He would have still been here. I'm incredibly torn when it comes to what's going on with Sauber right now before it becomes Audi. There are 4 drivers probably which seem likely to get the chance to pilot the C45 alongside Nico Hülkenberg, who I can imagine is probably a little bit peeved considering the terms of his appointment at Sauber have changed drastically. Back when he signed, Andreas Seidel was still the CEO of the group. Now he's no longer there, they've completely changed their direction, and it's all fallen apart. Who might be piloting alongside him? It's really vague right now, and there is a somewhat valid case for all 4 of them. And then, of course, there was Robert Schwarzman, who did an FP1 session for them the other day, and I'm like, where did he come from? So, Robert in there with the cheeky save? But ultimately, it comes down to exactly what Mattia Binotto wants for the team over the next 2 years. Do they want to give a rookie a leg up considering youngsters are cool again? Or do they get somebody in to steady the ship, a second chance, before Audi comes back into full focus? Because Binotto does have a really good grasp as to what Mick Schumacher is capable of, and he might want to actually give him the opportunity that wasn't afforded him at the Ferrari Driver Academy, and Audi has given him full autonomy, essentially, to do what he wants for the team and what he thinks is best, and so far I do think he is quite capable of actually making Audi into a competent team eventually. But there is also the matter of Audi justifying itself to be in Formula 1, and that includes maybe a nice cheeky little bump of its car sales. It depends which driver can provide the biggest bump, and I'll talk about more of that later because one of my followers, Frederick Neuling, really came up with a good little chart, and I love me some charts and statistics, so I'll get to that later. Thanks, Frederick. But first, let me tell you why I'm so torn, and if you've been following my content for a while now, then you'll probably know that I am a big Mick Schumacher nut. I adore the kid. And if you're not familiar with that idea of mine, you might want to subscribe to the channel to get an understanding as to why I talk about Mick Schumacher so much and why I'm on a ladder. I started following him when he was in the Junior Formula E, and I was a big Michael Schumacher fan back in the day when I started watching F1. And I've also been dabbling in his goings-on at Alpine over in the World Endurance Championship, and I can tell you, he is really doing the business there. I will defend this young man to the ends of the earth, because he has a quality which I think is incredibly valuable for a team like Sauber, and he's been able to demonstrate at Alpine because at that race where they got their first podium, Mick pretty much did most of the work in that car. He did at least about 3.5 or 3.75 of an hour, almost 2/3 of the entire length of the race. And also, as also justified by Toto, he has one of the strongest work ethics out there. He is prepared to put in the work, and he's just a really good person to be around in terms of personality. He just seems so chill and mellow and nice. But also at the same time, you cannot forget Austria last year, when he felt aggrieved. You saw a bit of angry Michael in there, and I want to see more of that. And if I were a team principal of a team and I had a full choice of drivers, Mick would be one of those drivers purely on the grounds of his commitment, amiability, and desire to learn and understand his work environment to a T, which is what he learned after a very iffy period at Haas during 2022. And if you think I'm not prepared to put my money where my mouth is, I will do over the off-season an F1 manager stream where you can make a custom team, and I will put Mick in that car, and I will justify in keeping him and show you why I think he's a really good guy to have. And of course I put him next to Oscar Piastri, why wouldn't I? But the reason why I'm making this video specifically is that speculation regarding Mick's tenure in Formula 1 has started to actually get back into high gear again after a period where it looked like it was certain he wasn't going to be getting back into F1 at all. Because Mattia Binotto, the new boss of the Audi F1 operation, stated that the team and Audi are actively evaluating Mick for a possible return to Formula 1. You know, after Gunther Steiner chose not to renew his contract for 2023, and then Gunther experienced the same thing by Gene Haas not renewing his contract a year later. So, you know, swings and roundabouts and all that. Okay, I'm not bitter with Gunther anymore. I went to actually go see his live show the other day. It was actually pretty good. It was cool. He was very much touting a bourbon whiskey that he's now an ambassador of. There's a lot of hustling going on there, but there was some valuable insights to be had, including about Mick. Oh, and don't you worry, he was taking a couple of good pot shots towards the egg, but the direct quote from Mattia Binotto regarding Mick, as well as the entire ethos of the Sauber Audi operation going forward, can be said right here. There are 2 essential operations. On the one hand, experience to set us on the growth path. On the other is a young, talented driver who can accompany us on the path to the top. We are definitely evaluating. I met him and spoke to him. I have known him for a long time, having been part of the Ferrari Driver Academy. I know his strengths and advantages. He is one of the names we have in mind. We are at the beginning of the climb. In front of us, there is Everest, and now we can only see the base. We are deciding which side to climb, but it is important to establish a path. If we compare ourselves with our opponents, we have about 400 fewer people. We need to add to them to be able to compete at the same level. They cannot be found in 2 days, and not necessarily in F1. Our choice is to invest in young people. From that quote, it pretty much says to me that Valtteri Bottas' chances of sticking around for one more year for sure are essentially minuscule. Why do I think this? Well, it's nothing against Valtteri, no. I'm not saying that Valtteri Bottas is a completely washed driver, no. He has been able to show us exactly what he can do over at Williams and at Mercedes. He is a very good, solid driver, but unfortunately, and this was very clear after the second half of 2022 with Alfa Romeo, that the car around him is very important, and he's not really been able to deliver the goods like he was able to do at his 2 previous teams, and we are now heading towards a season where, for the first time in his entire career, this will be the first season where Bottas doesn't score a single point. Yeah, that's really true, and that's not really helping his campaign to remain in Formula 1. Had he bagged a few more points and gotten Sauber off the bottom, then maybe we'd still be talking about Bottas getting a contract extension. But let's be real, I think Sauber, and by proxy Audi, are looking to change things up. And Bottas, $10 million a year? I think Audi are looking at that and going, are we really sure we want to keep this guy? Because he's not really giving us a good return on our investment. And from Binotto's quote, it's safe to suggest that the team will be wanting to look at younger drivers and employees for a possible solution, which could run the course with them for the long-term future of the team. Because he quotes further on that he's suggesting Audi might be competitive in 2030, when potentially a brand new power unit could be right there being introduced, and these new hires will have gained some valuable experience. Yeah, that's quite a long ways away, and I'm glad that Mattia is not showing any delusions of grandeur. All of those old targets of Audi's going to be great in 2027. Yeah, that's not happening anymore. They're actually being a little bit more realistic. But do you really expect that Valtteri will still be around F1 in 2030? I know that Lewis and Fernando have made getting old in Formula 1 look rather cool, but I don't think every single driver will be wanting to stick around for that long. I just feel like Valtteri has given the team as much as he can give in terms of the insights that he was able to manifest and acquire when he was at Mercedes. I feel like there's not really much for the team to learn from Bottas anymore after now 3 seasons. And besides, I feel like Nico Hülkenberg can provide just as much experience for far less money, because currently he's being paid like $2 million a year at Haas. Even if he got a 100% pay increase, it would still be a better return on his investment. And for people wondering if Nico is a good enough team leader, well, take a look at what he did at Haas over the last couple of seasons. He's been carrying that team. He's been such a good focal point for them. So I think all of that experience, as well as his general experience throughout his entire F1 career, will be a really good linchpin to begin with for Sauber Audi. So maybe Sauber might need a fresh pair of eyes to help lead the team before they pick somebody else, like maybe Mick Schumacher, to lead them when Nico chooses to hang up his helmet for good, maybe after his contract ends in 2027, and Audi can then go from there. Because let's be real, F1 is all about the best drivers in the world competing against one another, but it is also in the business of making money and appealing to as many consumers as possible for their products and services. This isn't a recent phenomenon or anything like that. This has been going all the way back to the late 60s, when they allowed teams to actually put sponsors on the car and change the colour of the car to not be the representation of their nation that they choose to race with. Like with Lotus, they used to be green, British Racing Green, then they went red and white for Gold Leaf, and then we went from there. But I will admit that since 2020, and in the wake of the Rona, things have really been kicked up a high gear. There have been countless additions of brand new sponsors and stuff like that. Ever since F1 literally became one of the only live sports that you could watch during those times, and they literally, Formula 1, had a captive audience that had nothing else to watch, except, as Ted Kravitz once said, cars on a track! And as far as I see it, 2 drivers are likely to get the gig out of these 4, with a cheeky reserve drive from Zhou Guanyu, because he does want to keep some skin in F1 and he's happy to be a reserve. And I'm sure Audi will be okay with that if they can retain some of his sponsorship money, kind of like what they had with Orlen and Kubica as their reserve driver. They managed to get some money from the Polish oil company. And then you might be going, wait, Law, what are you talking about? Why are you ignoring Théo Pourchaire? I don't want to ignore Teo Porcher. I think Teo seriously deserves a chance in Formula One. He is the Sauber Academy representative. In fact, he's the only main candidate of the Sauber Academy because now Zane Maloney's gone off to Formula E to represent, I think, with Lola. Teo's chance is meant to be now. Honestly, I think he should have had his opportunity this year instead of being bandied about Super Formula and then to McLaren, then they dropped him. He's had a torrid 2024. But as he said quite a few times in many interviews, he does not come with money. He barely has any money to get by anymore. He does not have that investment, which many other candidates still do have. If it were up to me, sure, I think he deserves a go in F1. I think he's done the time. But capitalism has another thing to say about that, and that does make me very, very sad, as is the case for hundreds or maybe thousands of drivers over the decades. They might have the talent, but do they have the money? No. So realistically, I think it's really down to Binotto wanting to choose either a young but proven driver or a brand new greenhorn rookie, that being Gabriel Bortoleto. Now, personally, I think Gabriel is fantastic, and if he wins the F2 Championship, being a back-to-back title winner, I think that would be a fantastic addition to Formula One, and we seriously need Brazil back on the grid. Because either he or Mick would be a good option for Sauber and then Audi, but it might ultimately, as I just touched upon, come down to financial backing or the prospect of financial gains for Audi that will help get either driver over the finishing line. So, okay, what would Audi prefer? Would they want a driver with the most personal backing? Because Bortoleto does come with a lot of backing, and I'm pretty sure that if it became really serious that he might get a chance, then he could maybe attract even more sponsors, or his current sponsors might pony up more money. Or maybe there might be more ancillary sponsors that might come around of their own volition, perhaps. And then there's Fernando Alonso knocking around in the background, and he can be very persuasive. But ultimately, that might not matter so much because Audi might be wanting to focus on car sales, since it's a very competitive environment out there. And so far, over the last couple of years, they've had a nice little increase. So get a little further bump up, perhaps? Depends which driver can provide that big bump. And it all comes down to this chart provided by Frederick Neuling from his source. If Gabriel were to be chosen, it would drive up sales in Brazil for sure, but would his hiring manifest 200,000 more sales in 1 or 2 years from that one country? Probably not. Nor would the same happen with Mick, but he would probably add more sales proportionally in Audi's domestic market, which is probably very, very important. And that is the same impact that Michael Schumacher had when he went to Mercedes after 2009, when it looked like he might come back in for Ferrari to substitute in for Felipe Massa when he was ruled out for the rest of the season after his really bad injury. And I'll never forget that one ad where Schumacher and Rosberg were in it, and there's this couple, one who's about to give birth is desperately trying to get to the hospital. They are then bickering amongst themselves which driver would get them to the hospital the fastest, and it's one of the funniest ads I've ever seen, and it's just so cheeky. But sentimental nostalgia aside, the financial clout that both those drivers had, since it's a German team and they're both German, it was fierce. Audi's in the business of making money and justifying its choice of getting into F1, and the costs that will come with it. It's really important to establish and shore it up. Therefore, having Mick Schumacher alongside Nico Hülkenberg would be enough to bolster the German market in favour of the car maker whilst it's getting on its feet. Now, okay, you might be then thinking, oh, so you only want Mick in to help Audi make more money? How shallow of you, Law. No. It wouldn't be down just to that, because as I touched upon, Mattia Binotto knows exactly what Mick Schumacher is capable of, having worked with him really closely at the Ferrari Driver Academy, so therefore I think if anyone wants to make a qualified decision as to the regards and potential of Mick Schumacher and how he's developed from there, it would be Mattia. Because I imagine quite a lot of people had not been paying attention to what Mick Schumacher's been up to for the last 2 years outside of F1. He's been able to learn a lot and managed this year to demonstrate in competitive racing what he's able to offer, something that Liam Lawson has not had this year. You only have to look to Alpine's endurance efforts to see how much Mick has come on, all of that culminating in the efforts that he and his teammates put in to acquire Alpine's first podium since returning to World Endurance. Now, you might be arguing that, oh, they only got that because the other car had to retire. Well, ultimately, to finish first, or third in this case, first you have to finish, and that's what they were able to do. You've got to be in it to win it, in this case a podium. And you got to look all of the stories and all of the reports from all of these experienced drivers and managers. They say that Mick Schumacher's work ethic is remarkable with commitment, because you could easily argue that, oh, if Toto put Mick in the Alpine team, that he could easily coast, that it was just a given job. No, he immersed himself fully. There's that shot of him at Le Mans helping out with the Alpine crew. Pierre Gasly's there. He just seems really involved. And okay, fine, if Mick Schumacher didn't get a role on F1, I'd be happy with him in World Endurance, because he might have actually found his niche. He might find himself a really good place with Alpine to help bring them up to glory, or maybe a couple of wins or something like that. If that's it for Mick Schumacher, fine, okay. At least he's got somewhere, which is somewhere he's quite happy, and also pretty apt considering that Michael Schumacher right before F1 was in sports cars. And also, Gunther Steiner himself has eased up on his stance regarding Mick's replacing at Haas. I saw him at his live show the other day, and he ultimately summed up the issue with Mick being related to overdriving the car and lacking a compelling mentor in which for him to learn from, something that he likened to Oscar Piastri having with Mark Webber. And also, in his continued war of words with Ralf Schumacher, Gunther, he then says that Ralf didn't seemingly do enough in terms of supporting Mick Schumacher in his endeavours, and that if Michael Schumacher was still knocking around, that maybe Mick might have actually been able to learn a bit quicker or be able to be a bit more resilient or something. We will never know that fact because we know what happened with Michael Schumacher and it's an absolute travesty. But in terms of Ralf being able to step up more for Mick, maybe Ralf could have been a little bit more involved, but we don't know the full machinations of it. But it is still something to think about. Maybe Ralf should have been Mick's manager or something. And in a way, I could kind of understand why Mick would have overdriven the car, because K-Mag just comes in, he gets 5th place on his first race having returned to Haas, and then Mick's having to do everything he can to really prove himself and get as many points possible for Haas. And let's not forget, Mick wasn't scoreless that year. He did get some really good results, but as we all know, Haas didn't really know how to upgrade a car properly under the tenure of Gunther. So by the time he actually learnt how to drive a car, the car was already slow, and it was lucky to even get out of Q1 at the end of that year. Conversely, Gabriel Bortoleto is also a compelling candidate. But you might be wondering why I'm not considering Franco Colapinto in this discussion. Well, I would do, but Franco's kind of taken himself out of the equation, saying that his plan A would be to remain with the Williams camp for next year. I think that's a perfectly valid point. Say, for example, okay, Franco gets the gig at Sauber next to Nico. That seems good, he's in Formula 1, he continues to be within the sport. But supposing Sauber don't kick on next year and they remain near the back of the grid, and Franco would be absolutely lucky to get out of Q1. What does that really say about him and his potential, considering that he was able to score in a Williams? And also, Franco would not be privy to many key important meetings as to the development of the Williams car for 2026, would be absolutely pivotal in his long-term future, maybe with that team, which he has established. James Vowles absolutely loves the pants off of him, and even though he's doing his best to get him an F1 seat in general, him not being at the Williams camp could be detrimental in terms of being able to make the most of any little misgivings that either Carlos or Alex has in 2026, when either one of them could leave. Carlos does have the option to leave if he's not satisfied, and Alex's contract runs out at the end of 2026. So if Franco were not right there and not being kept abreast as to what's going on within Williams, then that might leave him just lacking an opportunity and not being the first option for James. As for Gabriel, if he were to win the F2 title, he would be left without a full-time seat if Mick were chosen, which probably would make his case to join Sauber all the more compelling. And we all have to remember here that Mattia is not rushing any decision whatsoever. He's going to be taking his time. But come on, a back-to-back potential champion, that is not a prospect to ignore blindly, and for that, yeah, I think Gabriel might have a slightly stronger shout, maybe at least in the short term, for the team, maybe not Audi the company. Sauber would be foolish to at least not consider Gabriel in some shape or form, maybe even give him a reserve role, but that also comes with its pitfalls as well. And Fernando Alonso is really keen to get him in because he is his biggest, best bet in terms of a junior talent for his management company. So to actually get an F1 driver with A14 management on his lapels, then that might be a nice little shout and a bump for his own management future career. But if you're thinking that I prefer one over the other, you know what? I don't have to like one over the other. I like them both, and I think either one of them would be a good shout next to Nico Hülkenberg, and he would be a really good teammate and leader to them. I would be okay with either option. It really depends on what Sauber wants to do. Does it want to believe in a young future team leader that could take over in the next couple of years? Or does it want to go really in with the brand new craze of really, really young drivers who are not even out of their teens or something, and then just develop them because there's no pressure whatsoever? And true, if Bortoleto were brought in, then there would be no pressure or expectations at Sauber because There's nothing to expect at Sauber, especially this year, when they could have had points at the beginning of the year, but they blew it. And I know that you might be saying that Mick Schumacher's already had his opportunities. There were 3 other teams that could potentially have had him, and they didn't take him. Alpine snubbed him for Jack Doohan, but you then got to counter that by saying, well, if they didn't pick Jack Doohan, then the Alpine Academy would be even more of a joke, so they kind of had no choice, really. Then there was Mercedes. They snubbed him completely, even though Toto loves the pants off of Mick. But then, of course, there was Kimi Antonelli, and Toto didn't want to do a Max Verstappen and completely let him get away Kimi again, especially considering Ferrari almost had him long, long ago. And then, of course, there's the Williams quote that James Vowles said that he was not special. And that is now something that James has said he regrets and is one of the biggest mistakes in his entire career. I think you probably should have phrased it a little better, James. But as I lightly touched upon, could there be a third way and Bortoleto becomes a reserve driver for Sauber Audi, while Schumacher and Hülkenberg lead the way for the next couple of years? Maybe, but that would be a precarious situation, and it could lead Gabriel to end up in reserve driver purgatory, kind of like with Felipe Drugovich at the moment with Aston Martin. And even though he's being wheeled out for Mexico City in an FP1 session, the prospect of Felipe getting into the grid now, 2 years after he won the F2 title, they're dwindling rapidly. So I am really concerned, and I do not want this to happen, that Gabriel might be overlooked, and especially since he's a back-to-back world champion potentially, if he can maintain the championship lead in F2 over Isaac Hadjar. And that is going to be something that McLaren might want to balance up as well, because they've got this really big talented guy from Brazil, an open market, and they want to make sure that he gets on the grid and gets some valuable experience. And if he can do that at a team that has no expectations, there's no pressure, and if he can score a point, they would be an absolute coup, then why not would they do it? But then I hear also that McLaren are not as accommodating when it comes to loaning Gabriel out as they were maybe a month or so ago. Why? I'm not quite sure. But I might have a theory in that maybe they might want Gabriel ready to go at a moment's notice and be able to call him back or up instantly should the next couple of years come up to a point where neither Norris and Piastri can work with one another and either one of them goes to another team or both of them leave at the same time, and McLaren need a brand new charge of their own camp and junior program to be able to fill in the gap. Which is something I talk about more in this video here that you can go and watch right now. As for Gabriel and Mick, I'll leave that up to you in the comments.